Crime Stack. Jeff Nadu Sitdown. Part 1.
That bomb that killed DeCicco, you don't think that was meant for someone else? I mean, come on.
Meant for Gotti.
Of course it was. They hated Gotti. Chin hated Gotti. Casso hated Gotti.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, all the big boys hated Gotti.
Please subscribe.
Yeah, they're not killing anyone. I mean, there's an edict, essentially, to not kill people. And look, if mob informants can walk around, you know, Little Italy and Howard Beach, look, even what I do, I mean, I have made people reach out to me. They don't reach out to me directly. They reach out through lawyers and stuff. Mm-hmm. In the 70s, you know, I wouldn't even get a knock on the door. They would wait for me to leave. They'd ambush me, and they'd get rid of me, probably.
Right. If they wanted to.
Yeah, it's a different world.
That's a very interesting thing you've pointed out there about, like, how Sammy the Bull, Michael Franzese, these people, how are they allowed to do what they do? Now, I think that they take a lot of security precautions.
I think he's and again, I've had this argument with one of my dear friends, RJ Roger, does a show with Mikey Scars, and like Michael has that concern, and I think to myself, like, I think if he walked down the street in Brooklyn, I don't think he'd have any issue. I just don't think the Mafia really has any play anymore. Like, they might try to do something, but they're just not the same group they once were. You know, I've had more good comments from those people than bad. You know, I've never had one person contact me and say, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. You know, I had a guy reach out to me about a month ago through a lawyer, and he said, these were his exact words to the lawyer. He said, I really respect what he does. I like watching his channel. I just don't like that someone said something about one thing I did in my past. And it was like, look, I know a lot of these guys watch this stuff. They love hearing their names.
Oh, yeah.
You know?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, Nicky Scarfo used to love that. John Gotti, they loved it. They love that. It's always nice to hear people talk about you. You know, they are gangsters. They relish in being called a gangster. They love it. I remember I heard a story that Nicky Scarfo once, Philip Leonetti, his nephew, was complaining because the press had given him the nickname Crazy Phil. Mm-hmm. And Nicky said, what the f*** are you complaining about? He goes, I'd kill to have a nickname like that.
Right. I think, I heard that.
And I remember Nicky made a comment at one point. He'd killed someone. He goes, I love this. I f***ing love this. Like, these guys loved that world, and like John Gotti Jr.'s talked about that. He talked about how, like, his dad, there was nothing he loved more than being a gangster, like being at the club, talking, having power, I mean, you have to figure, and I've had a little bit of fame, just a bit, I've done little things that, people, like, I remember when I was at Barstool, I did this thing called Rough and Rowdy. It's like this boxing match, and it was a pretty well-received event. We had a lot of pay-per-view buys. It was in an arena, and I remember that night. I didn't win, but I was on top of the world. Like, everybody wanted to talk to me. Like, it felt awesome. Like, that's just a small little field, but I couldn't imagine being like being John Gotti was like being the president. You walk down the street, it's like, holy shit, that's John Gotti. Like, everybody knows who he is. It's got to be quite exhilarating.
One of the series of interviews I did recently with Sandra Petty, I call them Mafia rock star, because Sonny Franzese was kind of this prototype Mafia rock star. He's in the music industry, sharp dresser, and but Sonny didn't like that. That he didn't want it like that. Whereas, like, people like John Gotti and some other guys you mentioned courted that and loved it. I mean, John Gotti is on the cover, a portrait of him done by Andy Warhol is on the cover of Time magazine. Yeah. I mean, he's a rock star. He's a movie star.
Well, a show I'd always wanted to do, just kind of an analyzing something of just like the difference between like a John Gotti who was born in 1940, right? So he's not even thought of when the Mafia is being formed, right? And then you look at someone like a Tony Salerno, for instance. Tony Salerno was born in the 10s, right? So by like late 20s, he was involved in crime, 30s, right? And I'd urge anyone to look at this. So look at when Gotti is being walked out of like court, right? And there's that infamous video where like he has the yellow
overcoat.
Yeah. And the guy with the mustache, George Gabriel's behind him, and he's got a big smile on his face. He, he's like, he says hello to John Miller, and he looks just fine, right?
He loves it.
And then there's a video of Tony Salerno coming out of
says "Fu."
No, it's not that video. This is a different one. It's at night, and you could see like there's so many reporters around him, and Vinny the Fish is like holding on to him, trying to get him through the whole thing, and he looks like a deer in headlights. Like he doesn't know how to, like, he's so uncomfortable. His body language is like, just, I don't feel right here. Like, this is a guy that's like, I think you make the case, like, with inflation, he'd probably be a billionaire from the Mafia. That's how much money he made. But you could tell he was so uncomfortable. And it's interesting to look at, like, the difference between how John Gotti just loved it, and guys like Salerno were like, I don't want to be photographed. I don't want you to know who I am. I don't want to know nothing, And it's just an interesting kind of look at like how over the years the mob changed, right? Because those guys back then, they were born in the 10s and the 20s, that by the 40s were like connected people. They don't want to be known. They didn't want to be, And you even look at like the one or two, like Lucky Luciano or Charlie Luciano. He kind of reveled in it, but he had by the end, not been really that connected to it. He had been over in Italy, but all those guys, Joe Bonnano, he wanted to have an interview. They're obsessed with this stuff.
He published a book.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
He published a book. It's like the thing. Now it's interesting how you kind of pointed something out, because it seems to me that like the problem is that Carlo Gambino would tell you this is the problem. Joe Colombo, John Gotti, when you're flashy, because the bottom line is, we kind of touched on this before too. If the government wants to get you, they are going to get you, legitimately or otherwise.
Well, here's what I'll say. If I think that the lucky thing for John Gotti was the Commission case. Let's say the Commission case never happened.
Right.
I think John Gotti would have still killed Paul Castellano, because that was a kind of an issue that was heading towards an ending, and he just got to him before Castellano got to him, and Castellano was under indictment. It was very difficult. But John Gotti would have been killed in the street the same way, because if I'm Frank DeCicco and I'm, let's say, Gravano or Jimmy Brown or any of those guys, I'd have said, look, this guy's no good. We got to get him out of the way. I mean, he's bad for business. And look, John was lucky enough where there was so much scrutiny after, Salerno was off the street. Chin was still around, but Salerno was now gone. And when Salerno gone, that was a problem. And Casso was kind of in hiding by the late 80s. It was messy. And look, remember, do you think that, like, that bomb that killed DeCicco, you don't think that was meant for someone else? I mean, come on.
Meant for Gotti.
Of course it was. They hated Gotti. Chin hated Gotti. Casso hated Gotti.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, all the big boys hated Gotti. The only friends that Gotti had were Victor Orena, who wasn't even the boss, and Joey Messino, who, until the 80s, they weren't even recognized in the Commission.
Jeff Nadu Sit Down Part 2 coming soon. Crime Stack. Don't forget to subscribe to the Crime Stack channels, like the videos, and share with your friends on social media. We here at Crime Stack appreciate you. Check out these videos now.